The most dangerous invasion in modern American history isn't happening overseas. It's happening in fields, suburbs, and creeks across one state, Texas. What began as a few escaped pigs has become a runaway crisis, millions of animals, billions in damage, and an eradication program that, in trying to fix the problem, may have unleashed a whole new set of dangers. This is the story the footage, the field notes, and the quiet reports try to tell, the footage Texas never wanted anyone to see. Imagine helicopters cutting low across open rangeland, crews coordinating by radio, and corral traps that snap shut when an entire sounder steps inside. On paper, that's the image of control, decisive, clinical, efficient. But when crews returned to those same fields, they didn't find neat progress. They found bones, scavengers, and soil changing in ways nobody expected. They found a messy aftermath that suggested a different reality. This wasn't just pest control. It was the front lines of an ecological crisis. Here's how we get from a nuisance to a national problem, and how the fix made things worse. The spread started quietly. In the 1980s, feral hogs occupied only a fraction of Texas counties. They were a local problem, something ranchers and hunters dealt with informally. But hogs reproduce fast. A sow can have 2 litters a year, 6 to 12 piglets each. Over decades, what once felt manageable exploded. Today, estimates put Texas feral hog population between 2.6 and 3 million animals. They roam nearly the entire state. The damage isn't small. Texas loses roughly $871 million a year to rooting, destroyed crops, broken fences, and equipment damage. Nationwide, across 13 affected states, the toll tops $1.6 billion annually. That scale forced a change in thinking. Small traps, stray hunts and improvised fences weren't enough. Hogs learn quickly. They avoid traps after one bad experience, change their travel routes when pressured, and hide where humans can't reach them. If the state had any hope of slowing the invasion, it had to stop reacting piecemeal and start planning at scale. Enter radical solutions. One of the boldest moves was aerial gunning, trained crews using helicopters to cull hogs en masse. Under normal circumstances, shooting from aircraft is heavily regulated. In this case, depredation permits were issued, and helicopters became a tool to reach numbers that ground teams couldn't. The idea was brutal and efficient. When hogs are flushed from wide-open fields, shooters on aircraft can remove large pockets at once. There were other, darker ideas on the table, poisoning trials using warfarin-based baits and commercial products designed for mass removal. That route sparked immediate controversy. Ranchers worried about accidental livestock poisoning, wildlife advocates warned about non-target species and secondary poisoning from scavengers eating tainted carcasses. Public distrust mounted, and large-scale poisoning was paused. Still, the fact that it was seriously considered tells you how desperate agency leaders felt. At first, the aggressive method seemed to work. Early aerial gunning flights removed significant percentages in targeted zones. Reports of single flights taking out around 31% of a local hog population circulated in command centers. Smart traps and larger corral traps began to capture entire sounders, not just a few wary individuals, avoiding the old mistake of teaching trick survivors to steer clear of humans. For a moment, it looked like the tide had turned. Teams flew in sync, radios crackled with clean communications, and field logs reported coordinated operations. But for every confident radio report, there were field notes that didn't make the glossy press releases: scattered carcasses, vultures in the tree rows, coyotes pacing fence lines, and dogs drawn from miles away by the smell of decomposition. And then the surprises started, small at first, then impossible to ignore. Crews began to notice coordinated behaviors they'd never seen before. Hogs seemed to move with sentries, individuals that kept watch while the rest fed or moved along. When helicopters approached, these lookout hogs would trigger the group, causing lightning-fast scattering into riverbeds, thickets, or dense brush where aircraft couldn't track them. This wasn't random panic. It looked like adaptation. The animals were learning how to counter the very tactics humans had designed to stop them. The adaptations didn't stop there. After interventions, teams revisited cleared zones to find rebound populations, often faster than models predicted. Surviving hogs reproduced quickly, and in some sites populations nearly rebuilt within months. Movement patterns confounded assumptions, too. Fresh tracks showed hogs crossing rivers previously considered natural barriers, and they turned up miles away in terrain helicopters couldn't reach. County by county, the results became uneven. Some areas saw real reductions, while others barely budged. In a few places the outcomes were so inconsistent that officials couldn't explain the variations. Then reality made itself visible on the ground. The aftermath of mass removal was not neat. Carcasses remained. Scavengers stripped remains, leaving bones and fluids that soaked into soil. Rooting and wallowing had loosened topsoil, sending sediment into creeks and streams. Environmental monitoring began to flag problems, sediment levels rose, currents clouded, and bacteria tests in some streams returned readings alarmingly higher than baseline. Field notes whispered about pockets of contamination, places where carcass fluids had pooled or soaked into low ground and, during rain, washed into waterways. The ecological ripple effects multiplied. Erosion worsened because grass and young plants, the very things that help hold soil, didn't recover as expected. Areas that should have started healing instead continued to lose vegetation. With fewer roots, rain and wind tore at the land. Streams clouded, water quality dropped. Wildlife that depended on the land suffered. Deer lost acorn supplies to large hog groups, ground-nesting birds faced rising predation. In short, the problem didn't end when hogs were removed. In many cases removing them exposed new vulnerabilities and generated new damage. Disease risk added another layer of alarm. Ranchers worried about swine brucellosis and pseudorabies, pathogens feral hogs can carry, and the idea of carcasses left to decompose in or near pastures raised fears about contamination of livestock and water. These risks, whether realized or potential, changed how some landowners managed their herds and water sources. Public reaction magnified the political pressure. Media began airing footage that brought the crisis into suburbs and small towns, hogs tearing up lawns, wandering near schools, crossing neighborhood streets as if they belonged there. Suddenly the issue moved from rural headlines to front-page fears. People who had never considered feral hogs a threat saw them trample gardens and terrorize cul-de-sacs, and they wanted answers. Farmers and ranchers, who had initially supported aggressive eradication, watched the same cycle repeat, repaired fields torn up again months later, water troughs tipped, and fences broken so often maintenance became a weekly chore. Their frustration, once directed at the animals, shifted toward the institutions that had promised a solution. Environmental groups pushed back for different reasons, calling out the continued, and in some cases undocumented, use of toxicants. They cautioned about non-target exposure, including pets and wildlife, and warned that tainted carcasses could create a secondary poisoning pathway. Officials pushed out numbers, flight tallies, trap counts, and maps of operations, but the more data they released, the more uneven the picture looked. In some counties the numbers showed real progress, in others they told a story of stubborn, persistent regrowth. The backlash forced a rethink. The state shifted away from single-solution approaches and toward integrated pest management, coordinated trapping, ground hunting, strategic fencing, and targeted removal where whole sounders were known to gather. The philosophy changed from hit them hard to pressure them consistently. A key lesson emerged: partial kills backfire. If you remove only a fraction of a sounder, the survivors scatter, reproduce, and rebuild. Whole sounder removal became the new goal: capture or remove every animal in a group at once. Another turning point was cooperation. Instead of each landowner fighting the battle alone, experts encouraged neighbors to form networks, share traps, coordinate hunts, and pool movement data. Where these cooperative landowner networks formed, patterns shifted. Hogs found fewer escape routes. Sounders encountered pressure from multiple sides, and damage reports began to slow in pockets. It wasn't a silver bullet, but it was progress. Counties that coordinated saw cleaner pastures and smaller, more manageable groups surviving from season to season. Even with better coordination, the war wasn't over. Hogs kept pushing into suburbs where traps and organized hunts were impossible. Rumors circulated about tougher hybrids, bordomestic mixes that some called super pigs, animals that could survive further north in tougher climates. Whether those stories were exaggerated or not, they injected another layer of worry into an already tense situation. When officials reviewed years of data, a grim arithmetic emerged. To keep the population from rising, models suggested Texas would need to remove at least 70% of feral hogs every single year. 70%. Not to win, merely to hold steady. That single figure reframes everything. It explains why the state tried helicopters, why they debated poisons, and why they pushed for large-scale, coordinated action. It also explains why the fight feels endless. This story is not just a Texas story. It has become a national case study in invasive species control. Researchers, wildlife agencies, and landowners around the country watch what happens here. The lessons are clear: tactics must be adaptive, operations must be coordinated across property lines, and one-off solutions are likely to fall short. Where adaptive management, the practice of changing methods as conditions evolve, has been adopted, it has become a roadmap for preventing a small problem from becoming a statewide emergency. So what does this footage, the grim images of carcasses, the scatter of vultures, the field notes with phrases like "unexpected rebound," actually mean for any of us? It means several hard truths. First, once an invasive species spreads beyond a tipping point, control becomes exponentially harder. Second, every tool we use will carry costs and trade-offs, ecological, social, and political. Third, local cooperation scales, isolated effort fails. Fourth, the war for balance is ongoing, every pause gives the hogs room to grow again. And finally, it raises a question both practical and philosophical: can Texas ever reach real, lasting control? Or are we facing a forever war where the goal is not eradication but continuous management? The footage suggests a state learning its limits in real time, testing strategies, absorbing painful feedback, and slowly layering smarter approaches on top of hard-earned lessons. If there's a silver lining, it's this: where communities work together and adopt adaptive strategies, hogs can be held at bay. Integrated management and whole-sounder removal reduce the rebound problem. Cooperative landowner networks close escape routes. Data sharing makes operations smarter. Those steps won't end the conflict, but they make it manageable in places where people commit to long-term pressure. This is also a wake-up call for policymakers and the public. Invasive species don't respect property lines. They don't respond to messaging or press releases. They respond to pressure and persistence. And sometimes, in trying to fix a problem fast, we can create new ones that demand just as much attention: contamination risks, erosion, disrupted ecosystems, and the political fallout of contested methods. So take this footage as a record, not just of operations and numbers, but of a state learning how hard it is to wrest control from an animal that multiplies quickly, adapts cleverly, and exploits every gap humans leave. It's a lesson in humility, planning, and cooperation. What do you think? Is this a war that can be won, or a fight that must be managed forever? Drop your thoughts below. If this sparked questions, I'll break down the strategies, the math behind that 70% figure, and real-life examples from counties that have made progress. But for now, remember this: the problem started small, grew fast, and taught a harsh lesson: when nature pushes back, the answers are rarely simple,